The demands mostly were about economy, about rising taxes, about job losses, about economic inequality. Because under all these economic difficulties, about 10 million people lost their middle class status. The rich become richer, and the poor become poorer.
Hi, good day, friends. This is Carlos Conde again for another episode of Open Talk, my new podcast on the Philippines. But this time, we're not going to be talking mainly on the Philippines. We're going to be talking about what's happening in Indonesia. So I'm joined today by my friend and former Human Rights Watch colleague, Andreas Harsono, who is based in Jakarta. Andreas is the senior researcher for Human Rights Watch covering Indonesia, and he's a long time also journalist, such as myself. We almost have the same kind of track in terms of our career. Hi, Andreas. Thank you for joining. I'd like to talk to you about, obviously, about what's happening in your country, and then later on, kind of situate that about what's happening in the Philippines, because there are some parallels. But before we go into that, can you tell us a little bit about what's the latest there in Jakarta right now, or in many other places in Indonesia?
In August, there were 107 cities involved in protests, including 42 with riots. Protesters attacked local parliament building. Some were burned down. Protesters attacked police stations. Some police stations were abandoned. 107 cities of Indonesia total 34 provinces. It means that almost all provinces saw the protests. The demands mostly were about economy, about rising taxes, about job losses, about economic inequality. Why? The trigger of the protest was the increase of housing allowances, PERK,
Yeah.
for lawmakers in Jakarta. At the same time, they are flexing their lifestyle, expensive watches, nice, flashy jacket clothes, men and women. Sadly, some of the lawmakers' houses were looted, including the house of the finance minister. So those are the underlying issue about how political parties do not fully represent the voters or their respective constituencies, how political parties and politicians are, quote unquote, out of touch with
Mm-hmm.
the reality on the grounds. The the trigger that made the protest much, much bigger and violence, sadly, was a police armor vehicle hitting a gig motorcycle taxi driver. His name is Afan Kurniawan, 21 years old. He was working that night. He stopped his motorcycle. He tried to cross the street because so many protesters, and he was hit by a police Barracuda van.
Wow.
Uh,
W-
the
Was that
police van,
deliberate? Was that deliberate? The hitting, or it was just an accident? Really? I mean,
the police, there are 7 police officers inside that van. The driver claimed that it was not deliberate. He did not see the the victim. But of course, it was being disputed because the fan stopped, reversed for a little bit, and then running over the driver. That is the second blow was the one that killed him. He died in the
oh
hospital.
wow.
And he was lying on the ground, the 7-ton fan running over that poor driver. That really angered the public. You know why? because under all these economic difficulties, about 10 million people lost their middle class status, and many of them became, over the last 1 year, 10 million lost their status as middle class members, and many of them joined either Grab or Gojek, becoming
Oh,
online motorcycle taxi drivers,
yeah.
or some
Let's
full
put
time,
that
some
in.
part time.
Yeah, let's put that in perspective, Andrea. So 10 million lost their middle class status. I mean, the population of Indonesia is how much? How many by now?
280 million.
That's still a lot.
Yeah,
And the
estimate.
economic difficulties obviously cuts across classes, except the highest one, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is the problem, because over the last 60 years, since 1965, the economic accumulation is becoming smaller and smaller. As of this year, according to the Agrarian Ministry, the land agency, 58% of certified lands in Indonesia are owned more or less by 60 families. Of course,
Wow.
through multiple layers of corporation. But the beneficiary owners of all these corporations are those 60 families. That is just one indicator how economic sources, land, are being controlled by less and less people in Indonesia over the last 60 years. Why 1965? Because it was the year of living dangerously.
Oh yeah, that time. Yeah.
1965 was the killing season. At the time of the communists, at least 500,000 people were killed. The most, according to one estimate, was 3 million were killed. And why the communists and land ownership? In 1960, Indonesia passed the Basic Agrarian Law, which paved the way for land reform, 1961. The Indonesian Communist Party and the Farmer Association, Farmer Union were at the forefront of trying to redistribute better land ownership because of colonialism. But then 1965 crackdown against the communists. The idea of better land distribution was shelved. The Suharto regime, military-backed regime, instead preferred to do what we call transmigration program,
Hmm.
moving landless farmers, people from mostly this densely populated Java Island to the outer islands, Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, the Maluku Island, West Papua, later also creating tension with the local ethnic groups in each respective area. The second program that the Suharto regime did, uh, from the Philippines Rice Institute,
Yeah. Yeah.
remember?
International Research
Yes.
Institute in Laguna. Yeah.
So they help export the rice seed, IR5, so that farmers can produce more rice in each hectare. So those are the two key programs to sideline the land reform program. So after the fall of Suharto, they continue until now. Thus, the land ownership is becoming narrower and narrower in Indonesia.
And of course, along with that, economic inequality also became wider.
It is. Economic disparity is becoming wider and wider. There was a very popular song in the 1980s in Indonesia. It is called Yang Kaya Makin Kaya, Yang Miskin Makin Miskin. The rich become richer, kaya is rich, and miskin is poor. Yang miskin makin miskin, the poor become poorer. That song is very popular until now.
Oh, wow. I mean, look, Andreas, your history and all of these, upheavals that occurred in your country from 1965 to this day mirrors a lot of our own upheavals in the Philippines, and we'll get into that later. But you for these protests that occurred in recent weeks, you mentioned that the trigger was the fact that the housing allowances for the lawmakers were increased kind of really high. But was there a specific incident that also, triggered many of these people to go out in the streets? I mean, the policies such as this, increasing the housing allowances, those come down rather gradually, I suppose. But was there something, I mean, like a lawmaker that really flaunted a lot of his wealth? Or like in the Philippines, what triggered a lot of the outcry here was the discovery of several what we call nepo babies, children of corrupt politicians or corrupt contractors who are working with politicians, putting on Instagram their wealth and all of that. Was there something like that in Indonesia as
It
well?
is. It is. It is also happening here. The wife and the children of corrupt politicians, they are flaunting their Rolex watches, Lamborghini, Ferrari, expensive cars. They're traveling overseas into exotic tourism destination areas, private jets, uh,
Wow.
showing their, what is it, Air Gulf
Hmm.
Stream private
Gulfstream,
jet.
yeah.
Yeah, with luxurious leather sofas, all of them on Instagram.
Oh, wow.
That's
Uh,
why their houses were being looted. But the main trigger, how these protests become bigger, was a viral video of that motorcycle taxi driver being hit,
crushed, yeah.
run over by the police car. The main issue was at the time, the main trigger was the lifestyle
Hmm.
of politician. But after the viral video of the police car, police brutality became another issue.
So what would have happened, Andreas, is that if not for that incident where the driver was killed, this would have been just another series of protests in Jakarta and nothing
Exactly.
else.
Exactly. Without that video, some videos actually of the same accident, without those videos, these are just going to be scattered protests.
Yeah, yeah.
That video was important because first, it is very raw. It is brutal. Bang! And then reverse, bang again. And the victim is a gig worker,
Hmm.
a Gojek driver,
Hmm. Oh, it's like
a
our in the Philippines, like a Grab driver, food
Grab
delivery, kind of
driver,
like that.
food
Yeah.
delivery. And this is the national line that connect all people from Jakarta to Makassar to Lombok Island to Bali to Kediri to Medan,
Oh,
wherever.
okay. So
Because
this this gig drive, yeah,
these drivers are everywhere.
yeah. So they sort of provide a connection among Indonesians in so many places, and so that is why the affinity by the public to what happened to that driver was really something, right? Um,
Exactly.
Let me ask you then, what has been the government's response not only to what happened to the driver, but also to the protests?
The President Prabowo show his respect toward the driver family. He came to see their, very small, urban poor, rented house, two-bedroom, meeting his father, mother, and sister neighbors. But at the same time, he met with political party bosses. They agreed to one is deactivate several of the controversial lawmakers, not fire, just being deactivating them. And
What does that
second,
mean? Deactivating them?
not clear. not trigger,
Take them out of their positions, not fired, but
not
just
fired, not fired.
shelve them.
Yeah, they are still having their salaries
Okay, okay, go on.
just to calm down the public anger. And the second is to cut the housing allowance, but not
Okay,
the whole perk because they still have many other allowances. They are still living a good life.
yeah. But obviously, at this point, Andreas, all of that actions by the government, that, well, on the surface might seem important, but it looks like it's too late for the government to even do that because the
Too
issue,
little and too late.
yeah, the too little and too late. Yeah, that's right. Because the issue right now, this crisis right now, has forced to the surface many of Indonesia's problems, particularly on the economy. So that, like, I was just scanning the news before we did this recording. The more Gojek drivers are planning on conducting or doing more protests in the coming days. So this looks like it has become a situation where many of the problems in the economy, in society, in Indonesia that are bubbling under the surface are now coming out because of this. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. This is kind of wait and see situation. Wait and see situation. The protester formulated their demands into what we call 17 plus 8. 17 short-term demands plus 8 long-term demands.
Mhm.
They include the reform of the police, the reform of the political parties, the reform of the general election system. And those are the long-term demand. Meanwhile, the short-term reform release all detained protesters, more
Oh
than
wow.
3,000, and also release those that are arrested for so-called criminal defamation article. They don't do violence, but they were also being arrested. Investigate the possible involvement of some army officers in looting, arson attack during the protest. So those are the short-term demands. So the mood right now is wait and see. President
Okay.
Prabowo said that, quote, making sense to investigate what happened last August, in the month
Okay.
of August.
How
If, if, and last but not the least, this is basically the main question is the economy. If the economy is keep getting these bad job losses and things from bad becoming worse, things will be much bigger, the protests.
how is the government addressing that? Because that's important, right? Because at the end of the day, this is what caused all of this. I mean, all of those are just triggers. The death of the Gojek driver and expensive housing allowance. Those are just triggers. So, what is the government doing in terms of the economy, addressing the root cause of this?
President Prabowo changed his economic minister, his finance minister, the respected Sri Mulyani, who had been for economic finance minister for nearly 15 years in serving under three different presidents, was replaced with a new finance minister, himself a mathematician economist. His approach is to take money of Indonesia reserve, put it into state-owned bank, and ask the bank to give more loans, to give more credit, to
Hmm.
trigger more economic growth, a center
Yeah.
of economic growth. That is the thing that the government is doing, hoping that it will create more job, it will rejuvenate
Hmm.
some kind of economic growth. The expectation is at least 5%, 6% economic growth in the next 1 year. But at the same time, some economists are worried because the new finance minister is going to pass the 3% limitation of having this kind of foreign reserve being used,
Hmm.
kind of incentive. So let's see. This
Yeah.
is this is a lot of very technical debate. I don't want to delve into much more
Yeah.
detail of this new economic policy, but the government is trying to do something with the
Yeah.
economy.
Is there something that's being done on what you raised earlier about the concentration of ownership of land in Indonesia?
No, unfortunately, no. This is something that is much more fundamental and difficult to 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 be solved
Yeah. Yeah.
because there are 16 laws that govern land ownership here. No? And again, this is very tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Forests, indigenous people rights,
Yeah.
villages, transmigration villages. This is much more complicated. And don't forget, like it or not, if you want to redo in terms of this unequal distribution, Indonesia should take a look at 1965.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
until now, Indonesia has not found officially the truth of what happened in 1965.
That seems like a very painful. I mean, obviously, it was a very painful period for you and your compatriots. But and that actually brings me to another question, Andreas, regarding human rights. All this protest, all of this anger that's coming out. How do you situate this in the overall human rights situation in Indonesia? I mean, you talk about the concentration of wealth, of land. I mean, necessarily that would mean, I assume, because that's what's happening in the Philippines, that would mean that a lot more people are driven homeless, are not, having enough land to till to try to, support their families, and that drives anger as well. So, can you give me a sense of what's the human rights situation right now in Indonesia, given all of this?
The questions are how do these corporations, palm oil, nickel mining, gold mining, coal mining, how do these corporations grab lands? And how do the indigenous people, the villagers whose land are being taken away, do resist? The key issues are, of course, about the law. One is this corporation collaborate with the police to harass all these land rights defenders.
Hmm.
To harass. Harassing means using the criminal code, whether using uh, the article of stealing, theft. These villagers, of course, they feel that this is our land. We have the
Yeah.
rights to till our land. And the company take the land, planted palm oil. The villagers claim that this is our land. We can take the palm oil fruit. So that is back and forth, stealing article, threatening criminal code, or and and many other criminal code related article. The second act that they do is they criminalize those activists, those villagers, those indigenous people. For instance, on Flores Island, because I'm talking with the Philippines, the Filipinos and the Filipinas, the the Catholic Church on Flores Island, predominantly Catholic island, own a plantation.
Wow.
This Catholic Church-owned company also displaced people, grabbed land, and then the villagers protested. And because this is a church-owned company, of course they mock Catholic priests. Blasphemy law. You commit blasphemy against Catholicism.
Huh.
Got harassed by the police using the blasphemy law. So blasphemy law is a weapon. Another is the law against spreading communism. Of course, many union workers, they are being accused as communists or red tagging in your language.
Yeah.
It is also being used in Indonesia. You are communist, thus sent to prison to silence criticism of the companies. Last but not the least is criminal defamation. Many activists are also being uh, put to trial, facing months of police questioning for defaming the owners of those companies. So many laws are being used by the police and the corporation to silence criticism. And now we are talking about millions of hectares of land, of rainforests being deforested, peatland being destroyed, for making way for those 60 families to control the lands and to accumulate wealth in Indonesia.
Wow, that's really something. I remember, when Indonesia years ago, when they were all burning down the forest there to make way for oil palm. I mean, the smokes would would uh, would reach the Philippines. There's so much parallelism, Andreas, about what's happening in your country and mine in terms of the challenges people face, human rights, particularly indigenous peoples, and how the government responds to the action by these marginalized groups, by these affected groups. You talked about laws being used. You talk about red tagging there, which is also being really really a bad problem here. And now we even have what's called filing terrorism financing charges against activists just to keep them from doing what they're doing. And most of those affected here in the Philippines are also similar in many ways in Indonesia. These are indigenous areas. I mean, obviously Indonesia has a much more violent and very very
We
I would
kill
say
more people.
bloody history in terms, but we also have our share of that. What can you tell Filipinos now about how they should be navigating the issues that we're facing here?
One is learning your past mistake. We are also trying to learn our past mistake. 1965, 1998, Asian economic crisis, at least 90,000 people were killed. Or 1945, between 1945 until 1949, there were killings against mostly minorities,
Hmm.
Christian minorities, Chinese minorities, Ambonese minorities, Minahasan minorities, 1945. 1998, also Maduris minorities on Kalimantan Island, ethnic Chinese were also being targeted. We need to learn from our dark past
Hmm.
a bit, not to repeat it again. And secondly, we need to list all problematic laws, all discriminatory regulation. We cannot build our nation forward, the Philippines, Indonesia forward, without listing all the discriminatory regulation. We need to treat our citizen equally, whether you are rich, whether you are poor, whether you are dark, brown, yellow, whether you are curly hair, straight hair, whether you are Christian, whether you are a Muslim, whether you are a Catholic, whether you are a Buddhist, or whether you are an atheist or agnostic, all of you have the same rights. We need to learn that. The people of the Philippines need to learn that we are equal, that we should have the same opportunities. Our children, our grandchildren should be able to do that. That is point number two. List all the discriminatory problems. Uh, Third point, I'm biased. I'm a journalist. I always believe in journalism. I believe is the better the quality of a journalism in a society, the better that society will be. Meanwhile, on the contrary, if the quality of our journalism is in decline, thus the public opinion that is shaped by our journalism will also be in decline. Thus, the quality of our society will also decline. So it is important to support quality journalism. It is always should be in our consciousness that journalists are important. This is the pillar, one pillar of our democracy. So basically, those three simple things, of course, very simplified things that we need to do. One is learn the past mistake. Second is list all problematic laws. And the third, increase the quality of journalism.
Wise words, Andreas. I really appreciate that you included the role of journalism and media in all of that. This has been really, really insightful, Andreas, and very, very informative coming from you. And I wish the turmoil in Indonesia ends soon. Thank you very much, Andreas. Andreas Harsono, Senior Researcher of Human Rights Watch from Jakarta. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Terima kasih.